At the time of making this video, India is the 4th worst hit country with regards to COVID-19. It's worse than the UK, worse than Spain, and worse than Italy. The only countries that are suffering more than India are Russia, Brazil, and the United States. But within all of these countries, there's one common denominator: job loss. Thousands and thousands of jobs are disappearing as companies downsize or go out of business. According to a recent NASSCOM survey, more than 90% of India's tech startups are seeing their revenues decline because of COVID-19, and 34% of them have seen their revenues dip by more than 80%. They are barely surviving. Before the pandemic is over, at least 40% of India's tech startups will have halted their operations in an effort to stay afloat. And a portion of that 40% will have begun the process of shutting down. And that's not even including the 4% of Indian startups that have already shut down. Now, you might be thinking that perhaps everything's gonna be okay, because the lockdown now is slowly being lifted. But the lockdown isn't fully over yet, and at this point in time, 70% of startups have 2 months or less of cash left. And according to a local Circle survey, 38% of them are completely out of money. Now, of course, this is very bad news, and we all wish that things were better, that the world wasn't going through this crisis right now. But there is one silver lining that I'd like to point out. Probably most people won't notice this or care about it until after the pandemic is over, but I'll just say it now: necessity is the mother of invention. It's often during humanity's darkest moments that entrepreneurs and inventors and creators emerge from the woodwork to create unique solutions in an attempt to mitigate some of the suffering that has infected the world. Here's a couple of companies that you've probably heard of: Uber, Slack, Airbnb, Square, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Yes, they're all unicorns, and they're also some of the most successful startups in the world. But I think that a lot of people forget that these companies were also founded between 2008 and 2010, which is when the world was going through the Great Recession. So here's what I'm trying to say here. Every crisis is also an opportunity because, to an extent, the playing field has been leveled. Trends have been disrupted, predictions haven't come true, investors are reevaluating, new markets are appearing where there weren't any before, and opportunities, for those who can see them, have emerged. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the business opportunities that the coronavirus pandemic and the financial recession that has come as a result have presented India with. First up, let's talk about Edtech. If you're Indian, then you know how important education is in this country. But even if you're not Indian, the numbers make it very clear. There are approximately 1.5 million schools in this country, and the number of students is expected to reach 280 million by 2021, making India one of the largest education ecosystems in the entire world. And that's just kindergarten to grade 12 that we're talking about here. There's also nearly 1,000 universities in the country and just shy of 40 million students enrolled in India's higher education system. But up until the day that the pandemic sent India into lockdown, a majority of this education was happening offline. Now though, things have definitely changed. Schools and colleges have been shut down, and even when they reopen, my guess is that a lot of parents are going to be hesitant to send their kids back to school, especially if the novel coronavirus is still infecting new people. Because with COVID-19, it's not just about individuals. If your kid picks up COVID-19 at school, that means that your other children will get it, you will get it, your spouse will get it, your parents will get it, and that's why EdTech has become so indispensable to Indian parents and their children. And India's EdTech startups are responding to this desperation and demand. Many have offered their products and services free of cost for a period of time during the lockdown so that the educations of millions of Indian students isn't disrupted. As an example of what's happened here in the EdTech space, let's take a look at India's only EdTech unicorn, Byju's.
We have made our learning app free.
The startup has over 50 million registered users on its platform, and 13.5 million of these 50 million started Byju's between March and April. The platform is also seeing more engagement than it did before the pandemic. Before the lockdown, sessions on Byju's typically lasted about 70 minutes. Today though, amidst the pandemic, students are averaging 100 minutes on the platform. And that's just Byju's. Similar growth trends are being seen by virtually every EdTech startup in the country. For example, Unacademy's founder and CEO, Gaurav Munjal, said that the company's revenue for the month of April alone surpassed their combined revenues of the years 2017, 2018, and the first half of 2019. Another example is an edtech startup called Vedantu. They've seen their revenues grow by 80% over the course of the last month. Now, I'm not saying that edtech is going to eliminate the popularity of offline schools, but its value proposition has been made abundantly clear to parents, students, and educators in a way that just wouldn't have been possible before the pandemic. People have been forced to see the value of edtech. They've been forced to test it out. And what many of them have discovered is that lockdown or no lockdown, edtech is an excellent supplement to traditional education. And for some, perhaps a replacement. All right, next up, let's talk about video conferencing. For a lot of people, working from home has become the new normal. And as a result, the use of video conferencing apps and software for professional use has exploded. One name in particular has become more or less ubiquitous across the world's business landscape, and that name is Zoom. This video conferencing startup was founded by Eric Yuan in 2011, and the company has spent the last decade essentially preparing itself for this moment. It is now the go-to video conferencing app for companies like Deloitte, Uber, Slack, Zendesk, Logitech, Dropbox, Pandora, Nasdaq, Autodesk, Rakuten, and many, many more. In December of 2019, Zoom had 10 million daily active users. But since the start of the novel coronavirus pandemic, millions of people around the world have been working from home. And so that number has grown to over 300 million daily active users across its video conferencing and remote collaboration platforms. That is an insane 30x growth. However, just because Zoom is currently the most popular video conferencing platform doesn't mean that other platforms haven't enjoyed similar growth because of the novel coronavirus. Google and Microsoft have both scaled their video conferencing platforms since the pandemic began. Google Meet became free in March of 2020, and they've also seen a 30x growth, with 3 billion minutes of video meetings being conducted daily. Microsoft Teams, on the other hand, has surpassed 44 million daily active users, which is more than double the 20 million that it reported in November of 2019. And Skype, which is also owned by Microsoft, has seen its average daily users increase by 70% month over month. Also, Skype-to-Skype calling minutes have increased by 220%. Okay, so that's all well and good, but what about India? Well, firstly, let's talk about Jio. While they might be a little bit late to this, they're set to launch their own video conferencing platform called Jio Meet. Also, while this doesn't technically fall under video conferencing per se, I thought it would be worth mentioning AirMeet. AirMeet is a Bangalore-based online event platform which enables its customers to host live online events for up to 1 million guests. However, what really sets AirMeet apart is the fact that they enable guests to network and interact with each other while the event is taking place. The founder and CEO of AirMeet, Lalit Mangal, said that AirMeet witnessed a nearly 10x growth, that's 1,000% growth, in video consumption on our platform compared to the pre-COVID times. All right, next up, let's talk about online grocery delivery. For years, online grocery delivery has been one of the toughest markets for Indian startups to crack. And the reason for this is the space's low profit margins and high churn rates. Startups either need to raise a huge amount of funds or generate enough orders to cover their costs with massive revenues. And of course, neither one of these things is easy to accomplish. That being said, the potential for growth in this market for the startups who do manage to survive is huge. Online food and grocery retail make up just 0.2% of the overall retail market in India. That number, though, is expected to reach 1.2% by 2023. Now, I know what you're thinking. 1.2% doesn't sound like a lot. However, it actually equates to $10.5 billion. That being said, grocery shopping has, up until very recently, been exclusively an offline activity for most Indian people. But like everything on this list, the novel coronavirus has changed that. Now, in 2020, people have a choice. They can either go out and shop at crowded markets or stand in line in poorly managed queues at their local kirana shop, or they can order groceries from the safety and convenience of their own homes. And a lot of people are understandably choosing to do the latter instead of the former. And this has resulted in tremendous growth for grocery delivery startups. Take the example of India's two grocery delivery unicorns, Big Basket and Grofers. Before the lockdown began, Big Basket was fulfilling around 150,000 orders every day. Now though, they're fulfilling double that, 300,000 orders per day. Grocers, on the other hand, saw a 100% surge in demand in the first week of the lockdown, and now they're seeing a 60% growth in their daily gross merchandise volume compared to pre-COVID-19 levels. Besides platforms that are exclusively focused on grocery delivery, e-commerce giants like Amazon and Flipkart have also taken the opportunity presented to them by the novel coronavirus to scale up their grocery delivery segments, especially because for an extended period of time, delivery of all non-essential products was completely halted by the government. At one point, the demand for online groceries was so massive that no service from any startup was able to keep up. Instead, these startups were forced to stop taking orders in order to fulfill pending ones. But what's gonna happen once this demand subsides? When markets are safe and you don't need to stand in little white circles while you wait in a queue outside of your local kirana shop? Well, it's hard to predict what the post-COVID-19 shopping experience is gonna look like for Indian people. But if grocery delivery startups do a good enough job of enticing people to stay on their platforms with competitive prices, enticing discounts, and a headache-free delivery process, then people might just end up deciding to shop exclusively online instead of using the time and energy required to go out and shop themselves. Industry experts are already predicting that online grocery shopping sales will equate to $3 billion this year, which is a huge 73% jump from last year's $1.7 billion. All right, next up, let's talk about video streaming. According to an ASOCHAM and PwC report, India's over-the-top video streaming market is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 22% between 2017 and 2022 to reach a market size of $823 million by 2022. However, this report was written before anyone had ever heard of COVID-19. And the rise in popularity of over-the-top video streaming here in India during the lockdown will probably result in that $823 million number being much higher. Cinema halls and movie theaters across the country have been closed, and so people are staying home and they're watching more media content on Netflix and Amazon Prime Video than ever before. According to data released by market research firm Caligato, between February 5th and March 28th, the average user engagement on Netflix went from under 50 minutes a day to 80 minutes a day. Also, local over-the-top streaming platform Z5, which offers users both free and premium content, has seen an 80% increase in its subscriber base, while its paid user base has grown by 45%. Another over-the-top platform, Byju, which used to see an average of 10,600 new subscribers per day, has witnessed a 60% growth since the pandemic started. They're now getting 17,000 new subscribers every day. This massive growth in the over-the-top streaming market has resulted in some pretty big changes for India's entertainment industry. Movie theaters and cinema halls have historically been the focus for Bollywood. Now though, these venues are closed, and so India's film distributors are being forced to release their movies on over-the-top streaming platforms. For example, Amazon Prime Video recently premiered the much-awaited Gulabo Sitabo, and they're also set to release Shakuntala Devi later this year. But the big question here is, will these platforms be able to hold on to people once the lockdown is over and COVID-19 is a thing of the past? Well, I guess it really depends on how well these companies turn streaming of movies and TV shows here in India into a daily habit for people. If it gets to the point where this is something that people feel like they can't live without, then these over-the-top streaming platforms will have established a strategic foothold in India's entertainment space. And even though they will have acquired this foothold during a crisis, after the crisis is over, they're not going to give it up. All right, next up, let's talk about gaming. The rise in popularity of gaming over the course of the last few months can be attributed to the same thing that has caused the rise in popularity of over-the-top streaming platforms: people having lots of free time and nowhere to go. According to a Google and KPMG report, India's online gaming market is expected to go from $290 million in 2017 to $1 billion by 2021. Again though, that study is from before the pandemic, and by 2021, this market may be much bigger than $1 billion. Firstly, let's take a look at popular mobile gaming tournament platform Mobile Premier League. The company's VP of Growth and Marketing, Abhishek Madhavan, said that the number of playthroughs of their games has increased by 55% between March and April of this year. And specifically for the most popular game, World Cricket Championship, they've seen a 100% increase in playthroughs. Then there's Paytm First Games, which has witnessed a massive 200% growth in its user base in just the month of March, gaining a staggering 75,000 users every single day. While the majority of its users are coming from India's metros, the company has also seen a rise in the number of users coming from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. And then there's GameTian Technologies' Ludo King. Talking about the game, the CEO of GameTian, Vikas Jaiswal, said that before the lockdown, the total number of daily active users was 15 million. After the lockdown, we touched 251 million in the beginning of May. Now that the lockdown is being diluted, the number has come down to 40 to 45 million. As for the average daily playtime, before the lockdown, it was 32 minutes. Now it is 49 minutes. Some players even play continuously for 3 or 4 hours. Considering the nostalgia associated with the game, it's no surprise that casual gamers would choose it as their preferred game. But it's also a reflection of the rising popularity of mobile games here in India during this pandemic. And now that more people than ever before are trying mobile gaming out for the first time, we can expect this industry to benefit in the long run from this spike that they've seen in playership. All right, guys, there you have it. Those are some of the sectors and companies that have benefited and grown the most during this time of crisis. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I would love it if you could leave a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts were on some of the things that we talked about today. Also, if you're not already subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We post new videos every single week about startups, entrepreneurs, and the latest startup news that's been happening in India's startup ecosystem. So hit subscribe, and while you're at it, you might as well hit the like button as well. And if you know of somebody who you think would enjoy this video, please don't hesitate to share it with them. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Backstage with Millionaires, and I will see you in the next one.